Welcome back to JFK 50.
It is a short 30-minute flight from Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth to Dallas Love Field. And on board Air Force One, Congressman Jim Wright sat next to President Kennedy. The president had asked Wright to explain the differences between Fort Worth and Dallas and why the two cities so close together geographically were so far apart in character and politics.
Fascinated by Jim Wright's explanation, President Kennedy told him he wished to resume their talk on the next leg of the flight to Austin. It turned out to be the last meaningful conversation the president ever had.
At Love Field, the pool coverage of the president's arrival was produced by WFAA-TV Channel 8, broadcast on every local station. And here's that coverage just as viewers saw it 50 years ago.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bob Walker speaking from Dallas Love Field. This is the control tower at Dallas Love Field, where a large crowd is gathered now to await the arrival of President and Mrs. John Fitzgerald Kennedy from...
Sleet is blowing in, but there's no cover for the people that are out there. And ponchos have been or will be handed out to the guests who are here. We've said before, umbrellas are not allowed.
Now, many of the guests here today are dignitaries, people who were here on that day 50 years ago.
And there's a lot of concern, of course, about the weather. So our chief meteorologist, Pete Delkus, is in early tracking that weather for us. So, Pete, what can we expect for the exact ceremony later on?
Well, Glory, we will see those on and off rain showers throughout the day, and the temperatures right now at the WFA studios are at 37 degrees. There where you are in Dealey Plaza, the temperature at the Dallas County Records Building is 35. The wind chill is 26, so cold temperatures indeed. And all across the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we're in the 30s. Wind chills are in the 20s. Teens are in the forecast. Not only that, but you do have a little bit of a break. That one little rain shower has moved out, but we have additional rain showers, just some light showers, maybe a pellet of sleet that will move in throughout the day. So when the ceremony begins just afternoon, a little bit of light rain and very, very cold temperatures are in store for you.
Right about now, some 50 years ago, President Kennedy was in Fort Worth, where he spoke to the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce.
Now, today, the city of Fort Worth held a ceremony of its own to honor the president. Jim Douglas was there and joins us now with more on that. Jim, good morning to you.
Good morning. And you know, it was kind of a cold day on that day back in '63 as well, but also rainy. So President Kennedy was kind of surprised when he walked out of the hotel and saw this big, enthusiastic crowd out here. And he told them there are no faint hearts in Fort Worth. Well, this morning about 6:15, Mayor Betsy Price, Secret Service agent Clint Hill, and Congressman Roger Williams placed a wreath at the Kennedy statue outside the Hilton Hotel. Hill was assigned to protect Mrs. Kennedy that day, and Congressman Williams was a 14-year-old who shook the president's hand here. The Chamber of Commerce held a breakfast to honor the Kennedys in '63, and another this morning to honor former House Speaker Jim Wright, who helped bring the Kennedys here and spent the morning with them. The boys' choir sang today, as they did back then. JFK gave his last speech here in Fort Worth that morning, and we hear a portion of that now.
2 years ago, I said that, introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting somewhat that same sensation as I travel around Texas. During the days of the Indian War, this city was a fort. During the days of World War I, even before the United States got into the war, Royal Canadian Air Force pilots were training here. During the days of World War II, the great Liberator bombers, on which my brother flew with his co-pilot from this city, were produced here. First non-stop flight around the world took off and returned here in a plane built in factories here. The first truly intercontinental bomber, the B-36, was produced here. The B-58, which is the finest weapon system in the world today, which it demonstrated most recently in flying from Tokyo to London with an average speed of nearly 1,000 miles per hour, is a Fort Worth product. The Iroquois helicopter from Fort Worth is a mainstay in our fight against the guerrillas in South Vietnam. The transportation of crews between our missile sites is done in planes produced here in Fort Worth.
So touting Fort Worth's industry back then is still very strong here. We watched a lot of people come and just stare up at the statue this morning, and including two brothers who came from California and even booked a room on the 8th floor of what is now the Hilton Hotel, wanting to be as close as possible to the memory of JFK. And that's what it's been all about here in Fort Worth, is getting as close as possible to that memory before the tragedy. Live in Fort Worth, Jim Douglas, Channel 8 News.
I can't imagine that speech went over big time in Fort Worth.
Yeah, it sure did. And just one final bit of trivia here. In that audience outside Hotel Texas on that morning was an 8-year-old, Bill Paxton. Actor Bill Paxton, who was born and raised in Fort Worth, was there that morning 3 rows back and was photographed 50 years ago.
Many memories for many of us. We'll be right back. Jacqueline Kennedy, did she not?
When I first entered the emergency room in Trauma Room 1, she was in the room standing just to the left of the door. And from time to time, she would leave but come back into the room. But she did see a significant amount of the resuscitation when we were performing, Dr. Perry was performing the tracheotomy, and I was doing a venous section, a cut down in the left upper arm.
Dr. Ronald Jones, we appreciate you, Chief Resident at Parkland at the time, 50 years ago. Thank you for joining us now at Baylor for your insight on that. And Ferris Rookstool III is here as well, joining us again. He said something interesting there that I wonder wasn't the beginning of conversation of how the president might have been shot. He said it appeared at first that there was an entry wound at the front and an exit wound at the back.
Yes, because they didn't flip over the president to examine the back. And in fact, when Dr. Perry did a tracheotomy and they intubated the president to basically try to get air to his lungs, they didn't flip him over, so they never were aware that that wound that was 5 3/8 inches in the back actually hit the president from the back and exited from the president's throat.
Wow. And you had a question?
Yeah, we put out a call to Twitter for you, and our conversation the last time was focused more squarely on Lee Harvey Oswald. Jason Wallace tweeted to say, if Lee Harvey Oswald was, as people suspected, to be somebody who was seeking the spotlight, why, when asked by police if he shot the president, did he not get up on his soapbox and say he'd killed the president? Instead, he denied it.
Well, very quickly, he was reminded of Huntsville and Old Sparky, the electric chair, and I think that had a very sobering effect on him in the ride to
when
police
he was
headquarters.
initially charged with J.D. Tippett's death.
That's correct.
And he said he was a patsy.
He said he was a patsy, and matter of fact, he said he didn't even own the rifles.
And of course, that proved to be not the case later on, we learned. All right, thank you very much, Ferris,
for joining us today.
Yes, much appreciated.
We'll be right back with more.
They came in with pickaxes and hammers, and they chopped the room up in little pieces and put them in these barrels and packed all the equipment up and left with them.
The National Archives here in Maryland says the contents of Parkland's Trauma Room 1 are different, but they are not federal records, meaning they're off limits to the public perhaps forever. The government said the only reason it purchased these old medical items is to keep them from becoming souvenirs.
President Kennedy and the First Lady arrived at Dallas Love Field at 11:35, just a little over an hour and a half from now, some 50 years ago. And it is a cold, wet morning here in Dealey Plaza. 5,000 guests expected, and I wouldn't be surprised if that number was a little lower due to this rain, because many of the people, as you mentioned earlier, were waiting for the president at the Trademark or actually out here, and so they're quite elderly now, and this weather, I can't imagine, would be good.
This weather can be a bit tough, although there are a fairly good number of people here who have arrived already this morning and are waiting some time for this ceremony to begin. Monica Diaz is joining us now. She's also right here at Dealey Plaza. Monica, good morning.
Ron and Gloria, we're here with some of the people who are attending this ceremony today. Joining me now is Robin and Patty Crawford. They're from West Virginia. And Robin, you have a special story. Why are you here today?
When President Kennedy ran for office, West Virginia helped put him over the top, and he came to my hometown. And my mother, I guess, was a staunch Democrat. She made sure that I got to meet him.
And so you met him, and then in 5th grade, this horrible day.
7 years old, and the 5th grade was when he was assassinated, and I just wondered what the country would be like had he lived.
For you, it's such a sad day in our history, but you wanted to be here. You submitted your application to be here, to get your tickets. Why was it important for you to be here today?
Well, it's just an opportunity to participate in history that I already know about.
And for you, I guess they're special because you went, your life was very different when you were 7.
Yes, when President Kennedy became president, I was attending segregated schools in West Virginia, and thanks to his efforts, we were able to integrate. Though Brown versus Board of Education was quite old at the time, but we were able to integrate before the civil rights legislation was passed after his death.
Okay. Thank you very much. And now let's go over to Jason Whiteley, who's going to give us more about what we're expecting at the ceremony today. Jason.
Monica, right now the stage is set behind us here. The dignitaries will be in the several rows of wooden chairs already. They have taken the rain covers off the stage here too for the event supposed to begin here in about 2 hours from now. Off to the sides here in the center, just east of the triple underpass, I would guess we were seeing already 1,000 people or so in all of Dealey Plaza. Some people cannot get over close to it, so they're standing over in the grassy knoll area there, hoping to get a glimpse of what happens here this afternoon. Behind us, immediately behind us, here on the press riser in the middle of Main Street, media from all around the world, from as far away as Australia, Tokyo, Europe, and places like that. Just a sense of how many people all around the world are interested in what happens in Dallas here this afternoon. Back to you all.
All right, Jason, thank you. And we want you to stay with us here throughout the day. We will begin our coverage of this ceremony beginning just before noon. That will be followed by an uninterrupted 2 hours of our coverage from 1963. You can also watch that at WFAA.com.
And as we mentioned, this cold front blew in last night, and it is still blowing and going, and it's very cold and getting little bits of sleet every now and then. We're undercover, but you couldn't really tell because it's kind of washing in on us. So let's check in one more time.
Ashley Banfield, it's Friday, November 22nd. His administration lasted only 1,000 days, cut short by an assassin's bullets in Dallas on this very day 50 years ago. John F. Kennedy here with First Lady Jackie Kennedy by his side in an open car, smiling to the cheering crowds. And then those terrible shots ringing out, echoing through the city and right across the nation, if not around the world. This morning, members of the Kennedy family laid a wreath at the president's grave in Arlington National Cemetery, its flame always burning. Across the Potomac, President Obama ordered that flags be lowered to half-staff at the White House and government buildings to mark this solemn day. Just after 12 noon, bells will toll in the city of Dallas, the start of a special ceremony on this 50th anniversary. CNN's Ed Lavandera has more on today's events.
At 12:30, the moment gunshots echoed through Dealey Plaza 50 years ago, bells will toll across the city of Dallas. A poignant moment honoring John F. Kennedy's life.
Do the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free.
Historian David McCullough will read passages from some of President Kennedy's speeches.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
5,000 people were invited to attend the Dealey Plaza ceremony, but no one from the Kennedy family will be here. The president's daughter, Caroline Kennedy, just started working as the U.S. ambassador to Japan. For the organizers of the event, like former Dallas Mayor Ron Kirk, this anniversary is a chance for Dallas to come to terms with the tragedy.
What we were looking for is an opportunity to mark an occasion that is a moment that's important in American history and world history, but do it in a way in which we can reflect on President Kennedy's legacy.
There will be no mention of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was buried in Fort Worth. Fresh flowers have been left on his gravesite this week. And you won't see the conspiracy theorists who still preach on the grassy knoll, like eyewitness James Tague, who watched the motorcade that day. One of the shots fired struck the curb at his feet. Debris flew up and cut his face.
You feel a little slighted not being invited to the ceremony?
No, I don't. Well, I was a guest speaker at the exact time on the 40th anniversary, but none of us witnesses are even invited to the 50th. They don't want us. They've made that clear.
Another victim often forgotten from the tragic day is Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett. His family will hold a candlelight vigil Friday night at the exact spot where Oswald shot the officer as he escaped downtown Dallas. Today's ceremony will end with the unveiling of a new monument to the president, inscribed with a passage from the speech Kennedy was supposed to give in Dallas that afternoon. It reads, in part, "We in this country, in this generation, are the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility." Words left unspoken 50 years ago, but resurrected for a new generation.
And our Ed Lavandera joins us live now from the city of Dallas. So, Ed, you're just down the street from where I used to live, and I used to drive by Dealey Plaza daily, but it's so different now, and it is solemn. What exactly are they doing right now, and how is this going to play out today?
Well, this is anything unlike this city has seen before in the 50 years since the assassination took place here on Elm Street. We are in Dealey Plaza. It has been cordoned off. There are 5,000 people who were invited to attend this ceremony. We'll hear briefly from the mayor, and we'll also hear historian David McCullough read excerpts of the speeches that President Kennedy gave. But this has never been done before here in the city of Dallas, and I think it really speaks to how much this city has struggled over the last 5 decades coming to terms with the fact that the assassination happened here and how difficult that has been for so many people. Many people talk about what a joyous day it was. It was a beautiful blue sky day. Thousands and tens of thousands of people had lined the streets of Dallas to watch this motorcade. This was the tail end here on Elm Street, just a few feet from where we're standing, is where President Kennedy was assassinated. And the fact that this entire area has been cordoned off is unlike anything this city has ever seen.
So, Ed, they used to call that, back in the day, they used to call that weather a Kennedy Day, because it seemed whenever the president traveled, it would be sunny. And as I recall, it started out as a rainy, a miserable day, and it turned into that beautiful day. But everyone just remembers Dallas because of that shooting, it seems. And that's something, as you said, that city's been dealing with. So are they looking forward in the commemoration today? Are they looking back? Are they doing a mixture of both?
Well, what you're not going to hear talk about is all of the controversy, the conspiracy theories, and that sort of thing. What this city really wants to do, and what it has taken them a long time to come to terms with, was how do they honor this city? There was a lot of talk about how vilified Kennedy was in this city back in 1963 at that time, but a lot of people will point out, if he was so vilified by so many people, then why did tens of thousands of people turn out to greet him that day? The images of him coming off of Air Force One and being cheered and hugged, and the number of people that turned out to watch him was staggering in many people's opinions. So, this was a city that was labeled the city of hate, the city that killed Kennedy. In fact, President Kennedy had said there was a announcement in the paper welcoming him to town in very ugly terms, if you will, and he said he was going to nut country. So this was a very difficult time for this city, and they hope that this will help put all of that behind them.
And for anyone who goes to Dallas and sees the 6th floor museum, it is an experience that you never forget. One of the more remarkable museums in this country, I'll say. Ed Lavandera, thank you so much. And you don't want to miss CNN's very special coverage of the memorial in Dallas. You can tune in at 1 o'clock Eastern. Got wall-to-wall coverage for you. It will all be live. We'll bring that to you.
MSNBC's Alex Witt has a look at the scars the assassination of the president has left on that city.
1963 Dallas was a small town grown big. Of the nearly 700,000 residents, as many as a third of them turned out to see President Kennedy and Jackie make the sunny drive from Love Field through downtown Dallas, until the sound of rifle shots shattered everything, including the image of Dallas.
But Dallas was branded as a city of shame and a city of hate and all these ridiculous terms that didn't really apply to most people. And Dallas residents resented it.
Lee Harvey Oswald was not from Dallas or of Dallas, but the perception proved hard to shake.
It's just been decades of continuous reminders that, oh, this is the city that killed presidents. No, it's not. One guy did.
Time moves on. People began to not blame the city, but to blame the right person. And especially after the Warren Commission report, to blame other things.
But Dallas bore that branding for a decade until 1972, when the Dallas Cowboys won their first Super Bowl championship and created the image as America's team. That was followed by the hit TV show Dallas, which captivated millions with its image of wealth and intrigue.
Dallas is such an easy place to live.
Dallas Mayor Michael Rawlings.
When people think today about Dallas, they think about business and what we do down here.
It's also become the mecca for the curious and the sentimental.
It's amazing to see the history.
And continues to fascinate to the extreme, with some running into the street to stand on the spot where the president was assassinated.
Most recognize the downtown Dallas skyline as an image of success and glamour. But for some, it will never obscure the dark day in Dealey Plaza.
Do you think of JFK?
Yes, I think that's probably the first thing that comes to mind.
Always.
Always.
I'm not sure we want to ever escape history. It's good to own history. It's something that you talk to your kids about.
Alex Witt, NBC News, Dallas.
So it was on that late November day around 12:30 in the afternoon Central Time that John F. Kennedy's motorcade turned the corner from Houston to Elm Street, with rows of Dallas residents standing on the side of the streets, Jackie Kennedy next to him in the back seat, everyone just trying to catch a glimpse of the first couple, and the first world-shattering shot ringing out, striking the young president in the head. First Lady Jackie could be seen desperately crawling for help atop the limousine, and our next guest bore witness to that moment that changed America forever. Tina Towner Pender, at just 13 years old, witnessed the assassination of JFK. Tina, thanks for joining me today, and we want to talk about that time in your life as just a young girl. You were standing in front of the Texas School Book Depository. You were filming the approach of the president's motorcade with your father. Tell me about why you and your dad were there and what memory vividly stands out to you from that day.
Well, my dad had shown me how to use the camera, an 8mm movie camera, so I knew how to use it, and I was focused on doing it correctly and keeping the camera still, and he would let me know when it was time to get ready to shoot the film. And we stepped into the street when he asked permission, a nearby policeman, if we could step into the street when the motorcade approached so we could take our film closer. And that's what we did. I stood right there on the corner and panned the motorcade, or actually just the limousine, as it turned around the corner, and I was looking through the viewfinder the whole time.
We're looking at images that you shot yourself as that 13-year-old little girl. You were interviewed for an article in the LA Times this week. In that article, it begins this way, saying, in 1963, a radio newsman, a schoolgirl, and a nurse were close to the action when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. What they saw still haunts them. Now, you were just 13. Is that article accurate? Does that memory still haunt you? What vividly can you recall from that moment in time?
Well, I wasn't where I could actually see the motorcade, or I couldn't see the limousine when the first gunshot sounded. The limousine turns that sharp corner there and goes down a hill, and there were people lining the street to my left, so all I could see was the back end of the limousine when I stopped taking the film. And it was about 2 seconds after that, I'm told, when the first gunshot sounded, and I thought it was firecrackers and someone was throwing firecrackers out of a window, so I glanced up quickly, but somebody, I don't know who, some man pulled me down to the ground, grabbed my arm and pulled me down to the ground and held on to me until he thought it was safe to get up. So as far as being haunted, oh, go ahead.
Tina, go ahead. What about being haunted by the memories that you were going to say?
Well, haunted is probably not a good word for me. I never felt like I was traumatized by it, and I think my age had something to do with that, and not being any closer to where the president was killed probably helped that feeling also.
And what do you make of the conspiracy theories and how people have discussed this over the last 5 decades of what really happened on that day? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't really have a theory of my own, other than I don't think we really know what happened. I don't think we know yet what happened. But, and I really haven't kept up with all, there's so many conspiracy theories. I've heard a few and read a few books about it, and some of them sound plausible. But all I know is what I heard and what I saw that day and what my parents witnessed all with me.
Well, you were a witness to this moment in our country's history, a sad and dark chapter for all of us. Tina Towner-Pender, thank you for sharing your story with us. I appreciate your time today. Coming up, how that moment changed life in America forever. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss, Larry Sabato, whose new book about the assassination of JF.
Devised this ceremony today to think about what should it be and what kind of a recognition should we have for the former president and for our city too. And so how was the thinking process about this as far as what sort of a ceremony would be? And you had a large committee. A lot of people were involved in that, weren't they?
Well, we were guided by one principle, but that we wanted the focus of this day that is very important in American history to be on the legacy of President Kennedy and to get people to reflect on just why he inspired so many people to think differently about public service, about how we relate to one another, and even the tone in which we express our public debate. And so I think Mayor Rawlings was very wise to recognize that this was not a moment that would go unnoted, and that we should take control of it and use it as an opportunity to celebrate and reflect on the legacy of this great young president.
Well, it's also about Dallas too, isn't it? Because Dallas has been attacked over the years for the events that happened here. And so there's some measure perhaps of healing for the city as well, is there?
I think for some you can argue there's some redemption, but I think, to be honest, most people in Dallas have moved on. Dallas was not responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy. That was the act of a single, mad, deranged individual. But we still had an opportunity to learn and grow from that. I'd like to think my election as mayor was some reflection of how far we've come. But the reality is the Dallas of today is a very modern, urban, progressive, diverse community. But this ceremony today does give our city an opportunity to express our love, our admiration for a president that I think a lot of Dallasites felt they were deprived of because of what happened 50 years ago.
And so do you figure that there's some pressure on this mayor to reflect that?
Well, I think the mayor is going to speak to the heart of what we want to deliver today, and I'm looking forward to hearing his words.
Thank you so much for talking with us, former Mayor Ron Kirk. Brian, back to you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Every Texan of a certain age can remember the pain they felt when they learned that President Kennedy had been assassinated. Ken talked about that a short time ago, but only one man remembers a certain kind of pain. We are talking about the spectator injured by a bullet fired from the 6th floor of the school book depository. That bullet, of course, meant for President Kennedy. NBC5's Jeff Smith caught up with him recently here in Dealey Plaza.
When James Tague walks through Dealey Plaza, the memories come flooding back.
Got over there just in time to hear this man sobbing to the policeman. His head exploded, his head exploded. The policeman said, "Whose head?" And he says, "The president's."
Tague had no intention of watching the motorcade that day. He was running late to meet his girlfriend, the woman he'd later marry, and was stuck in traffic.
I was concerned that I was late, and I was in this lane of traffic.
Tague was standing here when the motorcade turned onto Elm Street in front of the Texas School Book Depository. That's when a sharp noise pierced through the cheering crowds.
And then somebody threw a firecracker. I was wondering what kind of an idiot would be throwing a firecracker with the president driving by.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route.
Of course, it wasn't a firecracker. It was an assassin's bullet.
And I'm standing there in disbelief of somebody throwing a firecracker. Crack, crack, 2 rifle shots, about a second apart, and something stings me in the face.
What stung him in the face was a fragment from a bullet intended to kill Kennedy.
Bullet that missed about right here.
It had struck the nearby curb.
Could have been a mixture of a little bit of lead and concrete. I was sprayed. Debris hit me in the face. Broke the skin maybe in 3 or 4 places. A drop of blood in each place. Nothing serious.
But it's arguably the most important minor injury in American history. Here's why. 2 weeks after the assassination, the FBI concluded Oswald fired 3 bullets. 2 hit President Kennedy, 1 hit Governor Connally. The Warren Commission was prepared to reach the same conclusion, but when Dallas newspaper reports about that concrete scar hit Washington, commissioners realized that 1 of the 3 shots missed the motorcade.
I didn't know I was changing history. I just knew it's probably important that there was a missed shot.
The 27-year-old filed this affidavit about what happened.
And all of a sudden, the Warren Commission had a big problem.
So you made them change?
They had to rewrite the report.
That spawned the infamous magic bullet theory, the contested conclusion that 1 bullet caused significant injuries to both men.
It changed history. If that policeman had not ran up to me that day and I'd have gone home and forgot it, history would have been different.
Tague understands his role in history, but even now, 50 years later, he struggles with what happened.
It's hard to grasp. It's hard to grasp. Today, I'm still trying to grasp it. President Kennedy was killed right here in front of me.
Now, James Tague has written 2 books on the assassination, 1 published just last month. And an interesting footnote to all of this, the FBI never amended its original report. Their official conclusion remains there was no missed shot, and they do not explain Tague's injury. Of course, 2 days after the assassination, the accused gunman was himself gunned down in the basement of Dallas Police Headquarters.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot. There's the man with a gun.
WBAP cameras captured that moment on film when Jack Ruby stepped forward and gunned down Lee Harvey Oswald. Meredith, I know you spoke recently to the officer who had Oswald by the arm.
Yeah, we all know that photograph. One of the most famous photos of all time is one that captured the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. The man in the light-colored suit that you see there and white cowboy hat is Dallas homicide detective Jim Lavelle. Today, he is 93. He lives in Dallas, and he still remembers that moment like it was yesterday. So you wear the cowboy hat every day?
Well, if I go out, I do. I wear it because I wore a hat when I went out all my life. And so.
There was a time when the spotlight began to wear on Officer Jim Lavelle. He abandoned that iconic cowboy hat.
It got to the point that I couldn't leave when I come to work in the morning. I'd get stopped twice before I get to the city hall. So then I left the hat off.
Lavelle shot to international fame November 24th, 1963, as he escorted Lee Harvey Oswald, the very moment Oswald was shot by Jack Ruby. Lavelle remembers that moment like it was yesterday.
He wanted to do something that would make him a hero or make him very popular, and that's what he wanted to do. I told him, I said, Lee, if anybody shoots at you, I hope they're as good a shot as you are. Meaning they'd hit him and not me. And he kind of laughed. He said, oh, nobody's going to shoot at me. It couldn't very well leave my mind because I'm reminded of it nearly every day, so through somebody.
And here at the Dallas Police Department, 50 years later, people line up for pictures and autographs. Lavelle says he gets over 300 requests from all over the world every year.
I know a lot of people want to make a hero or something out of me, but all I was doing was a police officer doing my job. That's all happening in those days.
A lot of people don't know this about him. Officer Lavelle was in the Navy and survived Pearl Harbor, and then, of course, that November 24th, 1963. Brian, want to send it back out to you in Dealey Plaza. You know, we're an hour away from this commemoration, but are the crowds, are people coming in now?
Back with Billy Kennedy. Billy, you were a junior in high school. You shook hands with President John F. Kennedy as his motorcade stopped for a moment in Oak Lawn before it went downtown. But
yes,
a few minutes later, he's dead. I'm sure you, like everyone else, watched the coverage. But then on Sunday morning, something happened. You're playing football in Lee Park, is that right?
That's right. I was playing football with all my friends, basically the same crowd. Same crowd I went to the parade with. And
of course, Lee Park is right on Turtle Creek, right where the president went 2 days before.
Sure. So what happens in the football game?
Well, on about the first play of the game, one of the big bruiser of a guy jumped over me, stepped on my wrist, just crushed it.
Crushed your wrist. You broke your wrist.
Broke my wrist. First play of the game.
So what'd you do?
Well, all my brother and my brother was with us, and friends. We got in the car, drove to the hospital.
Now, the hospital is Parkland Hospital.
Parkland Hospital.
And it's Sunday morning, folks. I think you're going to get the picture in a minute.
Okay. So we were at Parkland Hospital and noticed a lot of activity there at Parkland Hospital. And we tried to go into the emergency, and a police officer stopped us and said, "What are you trying to do?" And my brother said, "He's got a broken arm." Well, the police officer, I don't think, believed me until he saw my bowed arm, and he said, "Come on in." So I went into the emergency. By that time, I don't know how my mother found out about me breaking my arm. Of course, there wasn't any cell phones at the time. And so I was getting my arm set, and the doctor was setting my arm, and all of a sudden, doors come open. They brought Lee Harvey Oswald in. He had just been shot by Jack Ruby.
So you got to see both ends of the story. You got to see the president moments before he was shot, and you got to see Lee Harvey Oswald being rolled in on a stretcher in his dying moments. Now, folks, there's one more thing about Billy Kennedy you don't know. Today is Billy Kennedy's wedding anniversary. His lovely bride, Karen, November 22nd. Kennedy, November 22nd. Billy, did you do this on purpose?
I did. I will never forget my anniversary.
And Karen wanted it to be that way, I guess.
That's true. That's true.
Well, that's good. Did you see Oswald? I mean, could you see him? What went through your head when you saw that going on?
Well, of course, I was in a somewhat pain, and everything was a lot of people, a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And it was just a very confusing time. But I did see him.
How did you know it was Oswald? Or did someone tell you, or what?
Well, it was pretty obvious who he was.
You seen him on TV?
I saw him on TV a day or two before. But the most interesting part about this, sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump or something right in the middle of history. But my mother, theoretically, was holding my wrist so hard and tight, it stopped the blood flow of my blood in my wrist, and 30 years later, my wrist died, and I had to get a bone transplant.
Billy Kennedy and his bone transplant saw both ends of the Kennedy story. We'll be back with more JFK 50 after these words.
At the Olympic Games, it is very tight.
Yes, and Brian, the crowds are starting to get thicker now as we get closer to the event. It is obviously very cold and damp, but the crowds are here, and there are layers and layers of barricades, bomb-sniffing dogs, dozens of police officers, a very secure event. And that's something we certainly didn't see decades ago. I mean, I want to point out real quickly that President Kennedy, when he arrived in Love Field, he asked his motorcade to stop multiple times between Love Field and Dealey Plaza so he can get out. On one occasion, he shook the hands of several school children that were there. At another time, he stopped the motorcade and was embracing some nuns that had showed up to support him. So he was very connected to people who were spectators who were witnessing him as he drove past, and asked the motorcade to stop. That's something we would never see nowadays in the security state that we live in. And certainly these levels of barricades and police protection, it was unheard of 50 years ago, but now it's a reality of the world we live in. Brian?
And it is such an electric moment that was captured on film. Jeff Smith, also here in Dealey Plaza. Thank you, Jeff. You know, just shy of this 50th anniversary, the Dallas Morning News gave us a rare look at some forgotten pictures from that tragic day. Meredith, I know you got to see those pictures firsthand. It really is an incredible find.
They really were, Brian. You know, it wasn't long ago the Dallas Morning News found more than 300 negatives showing President Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson's trip to North Texas. The images had been tucked away for decades.
Dallas Morning News photographer from the 2nd. John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson got off the airplane at Meacham Field in Fort Worth. Until the 2nd, they got on the airplane at Love Field in Dallas. Dallas Morning News photographer going, and it hasn't been seen in 53 years.
Very few remember JFK's successful Dallas trip, a 1960 campaign stop, 3 years before he would die here.
I thought what he originally showed me.
Alan Peppert, a staff writer at the Dallas Morning News, did. And while digging, discovered over 300 never-before-seen negatives in the archives.
Yeah, I think this is the most exciting discovery of my career.
Bringing the negatives to life was no small feat.
That was a very typical contact sheet photo. I'm like, huh, well, I mean, that's Lady Bird Johnson. That's pretty obvious. That's, you know, we know who it is, but is there anything here? Yeah, there is. Yeah.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
And this, of course, like a lot of the contact sheets, this was backwards. And we went, oh, there it is. Well, let's center it.
This one was taken in downtown Fort Worth.
Well, we scan it in. Up, we adjust the light a little bit. We crop it. And then we've got this Norman Rockwell painting policeman back here blowing his whistle because people are putting their hands on him.
And this is Memorial Auditorium in Dallas before and after the photo edit. The pictures really speak to an era.
There's women everywhere looking at him. It's like, hey now.
And on this carefree campaign stop, Kennedy made it to Love Field.
A lot of the pictures and video that you're seeing are on our iPhone app that you can download for free. We also have an interactive map that shows all the significant moments of that day 50 years ago. And at last check, it was among the top 50 free downloads on iTunes. Just search JFK 50 there on iTunes. We are back right after a quick break. We're live in Dealey Plaza commemorating the late President John F. Kennedy.
Good morning, and thank you very much for staying with us. I'm Tracy Rowlett, and for the next 4 hours, Iola Johnson and I will have the pleasure of continuing with our special coverage of JFK 50, a Texas tribute.
That's right, Tracy, and in just about an hour, we'll be going live to Dealey Plaza for special ceremony honoring President Kennedy. Don Wall is there now and has been monitoring the crowd as the hour draws near. Don, what can you tell us about it?
Hi, Iowa. Hi, Tracy. It's good to be with you this morning, 50 years after the assassination of President Kennedy. Let's set the stage. Take a look over here. It is beginning to assemble. About 2,000 people got lottery tickets to get here. They applied for those tickets. You can see the crowd is gathering, and they've been showing films of JFK all morning. His trips to Ireland, to Germany, all very happy, exciting films. And so actually the streets of Dallas 50 years ago were also very happy. This was a happy place. The streets were filled with people, thousands of...
Date on the calendar for Bobby Wygant. What do you remember about that day? How did it start for you?
It started as a typical day, even though it was my 37th birthday.
In 1963, Bobby's birthday fell on a Friday. She came to work to host her daily talk show called Dateline, which aired from 12:30 to 1 o'clock. You have your diary from that day. What's on that page?
The first interview was with Ray McKinley, a Fort Worth guy who made it good. And he was in town fronting the old Glenn Miller Band.
He should start talking within about 7 or 8 minutes, assuming he arrives within the next few minutes.
Bobby knew going in the show might not go as planned because President Kennedy was in Dallas.
No one knows celebrity better than you do. How much of a celebrity? He was obviously the president, but how much of a celebrity was John F. Kennedy?
Oh, I mean, In today's language, he was a rock star. They told me, the director said, now, Bobby, if the president gets to the trademark earlier, we will cut immediately. So you might be in the middle of something and all of a sudden, you know, you'll be off because we'll cut to the president.
Bobby started the show, but within minutes, NBC News interrupted.
I looked at the monitor and saw the graphic news bulletin. And so I stopped talking. And a voice came in and said, we have just heard from our people in the field at the parade, President's Parade, that shots, sounds resembling shots were heard in the vicinity of the motorcade.
The President of the United States.
When did it dawn on you what was really going on? And what was your reaction?
The first thought I had, Brian, was some nut is down there shooting off firecrackers because Texans are big on firecrackers. And I was annoyed that, oh, come on.
The interruptions kept coming.
The second interruption that we had was more like they were shots and the president's vehicle has been speeding toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. So then we knew something had taken place.
As he was waving back, the shot rang out and he slumped down in the seat.
Finally, it was determined that the president was shot, John Connally was shot, they were at Parkland, Jackie was there, and Nellie Connally was there, and but they didn't know the extent of the injuries.
But upon arriving at the hospital, a policeman took me to the emergency room immediately. And there the president was lying on the portable table.
And the last bulletin that interrupted our interview said that John F. Kennedy had been given the last... Okay, Bobby, you can sign it off. And we're shooting it up to the network in New York. And I am Roman Catholic, and I said we should not make any hasty conclusions about the last rites being given, because anytime there's a person in danger, the rites are given, not particularly for the death of the person, but for the healing of the person and God's blessings.
That was how Bobby signed off the air, but her message of hope was soon shattered.
Shortly after the network took it, then the announcement was made that John F. Kennedy had died.
So many people in this community learned about this from you.
Yes. And I still occasionally, Brian, someone will come up to me on the street or where I am. Bobby, I'll never forget the day of the Kennedy assassination. How could you keep on going? How could you?
Was that the most challenging, memorable show you ever did?
Oh, absolutely. The most challenging.
With the show over, Bobby barely moved.
I sat in the studio the whole day, at that end of the studio, in the same chair. I sat there until about 6 o'clock. It was beyond wanting to cry. I was just, like my whole inside had just died. I couldn't cry even. I was just, I've never had a feeling like that.
After all this time, how fresh is it still for you?
Well, like when I sit here talking with you like this, Brian, it's very fresh. I still remember I was on this side of the studio facing east. I can see the crew still there. It's very fresh.
And Bobby Wygant will never forget the moment the nightmare became real.
Sometime the next morning, I started to wake up, and the TV is on, and I was thinking as I was getting awake, oh my gosh, I've just had the worst dream. Oh, they killed the president. And then I realized, getting awake a little bit more, that it wasn't a dream, that it really happened. We have, lost the president. And then I started crying. It's the first time I really started crying. And so I didn't know what to do. I do what I always do in crisis. I just prayed, and I prayed a lot all that day.
A living legend, our own Bobby Wygant. Bobby did not have a show for another week while this television station and NBC News covered President Kennedy's assassination. You know, Meredith, I can't help but think about our colleagues who came before us on that day. They were in shock like everyone else. They quickly became exhausted, but they pressed on to bring the world this story.
No doubt about it. Living legend right there in Bobby Wygant. We're taking another look live there in Dealey Plaza. 37 degrees this morning. Chief Meteorologist David Finfrock is at the weather expert desk.
When he died, and how he will feel today giving the prayer here.
I was 16 years of age in 1963.
A teenager living in Ireland, inspired by Kennedy's presidency.
To us, this was, the maximum, that an immigrant could become the president of the United States. And I think that was the important thing for the Irish people. That he was Catholic, everybody in Ireland was Catholic, so it was natural that he was Catholic. But for an Irish person to be elected, president of the United States of America, and that inspired me, even I would say, in many ways, even he inspired me to choose the career I chose in life. And because he was all about going out there and changing the world and doing something. That's all I wanted to do.
What did you think of this man? What did your country think?
We saw him as the answer to the world's problems at that time, because he was young, he had known what war was like, he had suffered through the war, and now, as he said in his inaugural address, the torch has been passed to a newer generation.
And then to learn that he was assassinated
by the bullet of one individual. A disastrous day, a depressing day. And my mother, almost in tears, they've shot the president, they've shot the president. And she said, they've shot our president, Well, I think as if my whole world come to an end. This was a man who had inspired hope, and he inspired us to go out there and do something and to change the world.
Bishop Farrell moved to Dallas in 2007 and had been here 4 days when he found himself at the old Red Courthouse.
And it was the first time I ever saw Dealey Plaza. That's when I first ever thought, here's where they shot the man that I admired so much and I loved.
And you've prayed about what you're going to pray about tomorrow.
Yes, I have. What would Kennedy would have wanted us to do? He would have wanted us to get up and to rebuild and to overcome all of the obstacles and make life better for those around us. I think that's what Kennedy and that's what Dallas has done. The phoenix has risen from the ashes of violence.
Very emotional conversation with the bishop, who shares with us the impressions that this man made on his life. We're actually standing inside the Kennedy Memorial now, behind the old red courthouse. People have been coming in all morning, some leaving flowers, some just taking pictures, others having a quiet moment of reflection, Tim, on this, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Again, the crowds have been coming here all morning. The crowd's growing here at Founders Plaza, at Main and Market, in the street, watching on the Go Vision screens for the ceremony that will take place today. Back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Sean. Well, with some perspective on the Kennedy legacy, the presidency. It was less than 3 years long. Welcome to SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson. Is Kennedy larger in death than he was in life? Would he have been seen, had he completed his first and presumably second term, a great president?
Well, it's hard to know how the second term would have played out. But what we typically see is that presidents run into trouble in their second terms, and we're seeing this right now with President Obama, President Bush, a lot of presidents. John F. Kennedy was popular in life. In legend, in death, he became a legendary and mythic figure, so that people can project onto Kennedy all of their hopes and aspirations for what might have been. So the fact that he was slain does make him this larger-than-life figure that nobody could have been absent that kind of event.
In fact, if you look at, you ask most people, and you say, what's the legacy of John F. Kennedy? They'll say civil rights. Well, civil rights began, the first president to really embrace civil rights was Dwight Eisenhower.
Right.
And Lyndon Johnson was the one who passed a bill that arguably JFK never could have gotten through the United States Senate.
That's exactly right. I mean, if you look at which president tangibly did the most for civil rights, it would have to be Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was the one in 1964 who shepherded the passage of the Civil Rights Act and then the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Some of the momentum for that was created by the Kennedy assassination. Some of the kind of national rallying that allowed for momentous legislation of that sort. But Johnson devoted more political capital to getting that done than Kennedy was ever inclined to do.
If you look at the conflicts that he was at loggerheads constantly with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They had a different vision of the world. I heard an interesting discussion recently suggesting that had Kennedy won a second term in office, we never would have gone waist deep into Vietnam as Johnson did. Johnson very much believed in fighting communism. Kennedy wasn't sold on that.
Kennedy was not as stubborn as Johnson proved to be in terms of the unwillingness to back away from the commitment in Vietnam. Probably Kennedy would have been more cautious than Johnson about getting so deeply involved with the hundreds of thousands of troops. All of this is speculative, but it's certainly true that the trajectory of American involvement in Southeast Asia could have been very different had Kennedy lived.
Let's talk briefly about Dallas in 1963 when Kennedy came. It was weeks after an ugly incident involving the ambassador to the United Nations, in which he was spat upon and hit by a woman with a sign. And Kennedy was, if you were to look at him objectively, a big government liberal Democrat, and that didn't sell in Dallas of that day.
That's true, and so Kennedy was not a universally beloved figure in Dallas or Texas or anywhere else for that matter in the United States. He was relatively popular nationally, but the key thing to remember is that Dallas did not kill John Kennedy. Exactly. Lee Harvey Oswald killed John Kennedy. Dallas is no more guilty of the assassination than Buffalo is guilty of the assassination of William McKinley, or Washington, D.C. is guilty of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. There were some extreme right-wing elements that were in Dallas that were responsible for some of the uncivil treatment of some figures, but Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with those people. He was not part of a quote-unquote vast right-wing conspiracy.
Right. If anything, he was exactly the opposite. He was still pro-communist.
That's exactly right. He had spent time in the Soviet Union, and so this is a linkage that sometimes gets overplayed in the public imagination.
We'll talk with you a little bit later. Thanks so much. One guy, very interesting guy, who was within inches of death that day was Jackie Kennedy's Secret Service agent Clint Hill, coming up his account of that terrible day in history. And here's how major national newspapers announced President Kennedy's death in 1963.
not possible. I think it's been a much healthier mood since then. Embrace it as history.
It is a monument that we know what happened in that building 50 years ago today, but that is a building that should have stayed, and it's a very good thing that it did. And
absolutely.
So many people, so many Americans, Richard, were not alive 50 years ago. So the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas is something to them like Pearl Harbor or even farther back the Civil War. It's something that you read about in the history books. But you and I were alive that day.
Yeah, you tell me about your experience. So you were a little younger than I was.
I was a third grader, and we were in elementary school. And to tell you how far back that was, we were in the auditorium watching a film strip. It wasn't a movie, it was a film strip. And I cannot remember what it was, but all of a sudden, the film strip stopped. We were plunged into darkness in the auditorium. And then the lights came on, and our principal was standing on the stage and said, a horrible thing has happened in Dallas, Texas. The president has been shot, and we are sending all of you home. Now, we were the generation who walked to and from school. And on that walk home, it was complete silence with all of us. And then we got home, and Richard, it was just those black and white images for that whole weekend of just watching with my family. And my grandparents had already died, so I was aware of grief and mourning, but I was not aware of grief for someone who wasn't in your family, someone you didn't know. And my mother and father were openly emotional in front of me and my sister. They were crying, and at one point, when the First Lady got back to Washington, I remember my dad kissed his finger, and then he put it on the TV screen, which was showing the cheek of the First Lady. And that was it was a shattering time. Richard, you were a young teenager.
Actually, 13-year-old in science class, Mr. Sorensen's science class, West Concord, Minnesota, little farming community in Minnesota. And like you, we walked to and from school, and I remember that somebody came in and pulled a science teacher aside and said, we didn't know what was going on at first. Then he came back and told us that the president has been shot in Dallas. I remember the same kind of just nobody knew what to say. There was just a silence. We all went to a central study hall and watched on the black and white TV. And most of my classmates would have been farm kids, so they would have had to wait for the bus. But I too remember that we were told at one point, you know, if you want to go home, go home. And I think most people did just kind of wander off. And I just remember the whole weekend being very, very sad.
And then for America, that was the beginning of the assassinations that we were experiencing, because it was Martin Luther King a few years later, and then, of course, Robert Kennedy. We've got more people coming in now, more dignitaries are filling the area, and it's starting to rain now. Okay, it's cold here and it's starting to rain, so you can see a lot of people down there have their rain gear on as they're moving closer to the stage, and the dignitaries are taking their seats. We've been able to see Craig Holcomb, former Dallas City Council member. Oh, I see former Mayor Tom Leppert. He's in a raincoat wearing a hat right now.
And it is starting to rain.
Oh,
we're gonna toss it back to the studio and see what we can do about this rain.
Well, I'm afraid not much, and they're handing out those very inexpensive clear parkas there, but no umbrellas for security reasons, right?
Absolutely not. No umbrellas anywhere.
Yeah, well,
we're in trouble.
Hunker down. I'm glad you're both there, and I'm here. Still to come, a Dallas Cowboys Hall of Famer talks about his emotional connection to the assassination, at times that he met President Kennedy when he was a college student.
I'm glad to be here in Jim Wright City, about 35.
Closer look at John F. Kennedy's final hours and what would turn out to be his final speech delivered in Fort Worth that day.
I talked to Roger yesterday, and Roger would have been on the cover of Life magazine on November 29th, 1963. Roger was a major threat at the Naval Academy with football. The Navy,
about to get the Heisman Trophy.
He's a Heisman Trophy winner, that's right. He'd been on Time magazine just the week before, the cover, and Roger was the man, okay? So he was a major threat as the Army-Navy game was coming up. That's always a legendary game. But because of the tragic events here in Dealey Plaza, Roger was not on the cover of Life magazine, and he showed me what his cover would have looked like and what the memorial cover did look like. Let's take a look.
you know, this is Life magazine. You talk about life. I mean, this cover would have been a thrill for my mother and my dad. I mean, it was the 22nd when they brought them all back, and this was like, I guess the day before or something. I got it. They brought it to me. They showed me at the Naval Academy.
For Roger Staubach, the Kennedy assassination was very personal, since he had met the president twice while he was in the White House.
After the 62 Army-Navy game, I had a really good game, and I got the word back that he really said some nice things about me. And that came from our coach, and I didn't get a letter from him. I wish I would have got a letter, but they say he really, I ran for 2 touchdowns and passed for 2. I hate to talk about it, Clarice. I think he knew who I was, and that was a thrill for me that he knew who I was. And then I shook his hand the next year at Quonset Point, and you know, that was great. I mean, he shook all of our hands, and he mentioned just briefly that he wanted to shake hands with the Navy quarterback that he saw play the year before. So I'm not sure that he really realized that when I shook his hand, but it still was being commander-in-chief and caring about the Naval Academy and being at the games. You know, we had an identity with the president.
Where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
I was getting ready to go to my thermodynamics class. I was in Bancroft Hall, and I heard all the yelling that the president's been shot. We didn't have TVs in our room. And so I was going down to class, down Stribling Walk, and then people were yelling back and forth that it was not good. And when I got to class, our teacher said he's not going to make it. And then we were just, I mean, you know, you're really in shock.
The Naval Academy held a memorial service that night, and the midshipmen all watched the TV coverage.
I think it was probably Sunday or Monday when we were told that we would, the families requested the Army-Navy game to be played and played on his behalf. So we got excited about that. No, as I mentioned, no pep rallies, no bonfires, but we had this emotion going into that game.
Navy's brilliant passer, Roger Staubach, tosses 11 passes and makes the...
It was a heck of a game, but I think the emotion in the feelings at that game were something that we'll never forget, because it was more than a football game. It was a game for the country, a game for the President of the United States.
Navy won 21-15 and went on to the national championship in the Cotton Bowl, but lost to Texas.
Roger back to throw, pumps it once.
Many credit the Cowboys and Staubach for helping reframe the image of Dallas in the years after the assassination.
I think there's a positive effect to that. I mean, you know, we had a phenomenal football coach in Tom Landry who, even though there was a dislike for Dallas and probably a dislike for the Dallas Cowboys, people really respected Tom Landry. And I think Tom Landry really was America's team was built. We had a winning season.
Staubach feels the assassination no longer defines Dallas. He's thankful to call Dallas home, and while looking to the future, he is thinking of the past.
I can't believe it's 50 years that has gone by, but it is.
You think it's going to be emotional for you?
Well, I think it'll be emotional for everyone, yeah. We do have there's a little more of what took place at that time at Navy, and then being Dallas and being here with the Cowboys, so it's a little different for me, but for everyone that was alive, that was old enough, I think all of us will be very emotional.
A somber and emotional day, Richard, and Roger Staubach is one of the dignitaries who is sitting down there in those chairs for the ceremony today, and he says that he and the Navy football team of 1963 are still very close. They still get together and they still talk about that experience and having met the president.
And he's always been such an interesting, good guy and such an integral part of our community over the last so many years. Okay, I got to admit, I got to fess up, Tim, that I did get an umbrella here. Clarice, she's tough. She probably could have done without it, but we have an umbrella now. It is still raining. I think it is colder. You can really see just about everybody's got rain gear out there.
Yeah, and the wind, Richard, has picked up because we can really feel the difference. It's getting much, much colder because there is much more wind now. But yeah, you do see a lot of people wearing those rain capes that they've been passing out to the dignitaries.
Kennedy's guy at the Secret Service. He was the one who usually protected her family. When shots were fired, he actually wanted to be on the back of the limousine, but President Kennedy didn't like that. He thought that that was somehow intrusive, somehow put a barrier between him and the people who wanted to see him. So that morning in Dealey Plaza, Clint Hill was walking behind on the car behind, and as soon as shots were fired, there's this iconic video of him running forward and jumping on the back of the limo. But we talked to him this morning on Good Day.
And as we proceeded down Main Street in Dallas, the crowds were very, very large. They were very friendly and very exuberant, so everybody was rather pleased. We noticed that there were people hanging out of windows and on balconies and rooftops. They were taking advantage of any location they could get to view the President and Mrs. Kennedy. And then we got down to the end of Main Street, turned right on Houston, and left on Elm, which was right in front of the Texas School Book Depository. We had to make a very sharp turn to the left on Elm, and as we traveled down that street, about 120 feet or so, I was on the left-hand side of the car immediately behind the President, and I heard an explosive noise over my right shoulder. My eyes immediately went toward the noise, and so doing, I scanned across the back of the presidential vehicle. I saw the President react to something, and I immediately jumped from my position and ran toward the presidential vehicle with the intention of getting up on top of the rear to prevent anything from happening that would damage either President or Mrs. Kennedy. Just before I got there, there was another shot that rang out, and it hit the President in the head. Because our responsibility was to protect the President, and we failed to do that, I do feel that sense of guilt that we were unable to do anything to prevent the assassination from happening.
You heard Clint Hill talking about that sense of guilt, Richard. He said that for years he suffered from demons because of what happened here in Dealey Plaza, the fact that he and the other agents were not able to protect the president, but he's been able to work through that. He's got a new book that he just released just a couple of days ago talking about his work here in Dealey Plaza and then what he's done for other presidents, because he was also Secret Service detail for President Johnson as well as President Nixon.
So dedicated, the kind of guy who really wanted to get between the bullet and Jackie and the president.
President Kennedy woke up 50 years ago in Fort Worth, and earlier today, Fort Worth Mayor Betsy Price held a very solemn ceremony laying a wreath at the statue of President Kennedy, which is a memorial to the president. And the time that he spent in Cowtown, he spoke to the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. 50 years ago in the morning, it was very rainy, very dreary, but the crowd loved him, Richard. They loved seeing the First Lady. They were so happy and proud. And I remember there was one point the president was given a cowboy hat, which he didn't put on, but he laughed and he held it and he said, you know what, when you come and see me, if you come see me Monday at the White House, you'll see me put this hat on. And of course, tragically, that was the day of the funeral.
In fact, we're going to show people that in a second here, Clarice. I've seen a headline once that said that Camelot ended in Fort Worth, and people forget that because he did. He spent his last night in Fort Worth. He gave his last speech in Fort Worth. He may have eaten his last meal in Fort Worth.
J.D. Tippit was killed while questioning Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, he had a partner that day, and interesting, that partner never shared his story until this week, 50 years later. Here's CBS 11's J.D. Miles.
It's not easy for R.C. Nelson to go back to that day nearly 50 years ago.
For 20 years, I wouldn't even talk about it.
What gets to you?
Pretty much just that day.
Nelson was a 26-year-old Dallas police officer and patrol partner of J.D. Tippit, who was shot and killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. Nelson helped arrest Oswald, and the now 76-year-old retiree believes he targeted Tippit intentionally because he wanted to be caught.
Oswald had not had his glory.
Nelson found no glory in his next assignment, protecting the man who killed his friend during an escort from the Dallas City Jail.
Pretty mad. Yeah. Mad indeed.
He's been shot. He's been shot.
When Jack Ruby shot Oswald, Nelson put handcuffs on the well-known nightclub owner.
And he turned over and said, "Hey guys, it's Jack, it's me."
Why are you telling your story for the first time?
Several authors contacted me for a story and I blew them off.
He retired from the department years later, wishing his patrol partner could have done the same. Nelson ended that dreadful day in a quiet Oak Cliff Park, where he sat alone in the darkness so no one could see his tears. 50 years later, he's still wiping them away.
Tough day.
J.D. Miles, CBS 11 News.
There's Mrs. Kennedy, and the crowd yells, and the President of the United States, shaking hands with the people. Boy, this is something. The presidential car moving out. The President and First Lady head out for downtown Dallas, where thousands should already be on the street right now, waiting for a view of the President and his wife.
Live from Dealey Plaza, this is News 8 Midday, as Dallas honors the life of President John F. Kennedy.
Thanks for joining us this midday on Friday, November 22nd, the day the nation lost a president.
Dallas and the nation losing its innocence in the process.
Again, thank you for joining us. We're live at this midday from Dealey Plaza. I'm John McKay.
I'm Gloria Campos, and thank you for joining us.
Lots of activity that we're expecting today. There are people who are behind us right now who are gathering for momentarily toward today's special event. Now, we're expecting this to take something on the order of at least the next hour, but we've got some dignitaries that have been arriving all morning long.
Right, some 5,000 people were here, are invited here, but only by lottery. We've got a little rain coming down, and they distributed as you can see, ponchos, plastic ponchos, to the guests here. Some of these kids right behind us are from DISD and are wearing shorts, John. They did not come prepared for this bone-chilling weather, which we've got wind chills in the mid-20s here.
Yeah, the surprising thing today, we have been telling you all day long about the fact that the weather is not going to be very pleasant, and it has certainly lived up to that. In fact, even in the last hour, because you've been here since early this morning, but even in the last hour to 90 minutes, it's gotten even colder, and now it's drizzling again.
Right, it was cold and breezy this morning when we got here about 4:30 and went through security, and the crew finished setting up for our daybreak shots. But as you said, it is raining now. And these kids behind us are wearing those ponchos that they distributed to the guests here. And I believe Pete Delkus is in the Weather Center right now to bring us up to date. Pete, is this going to get heavier?
Well, Gloria, we do have that light rain out there right now, and as we've been mentioning on and off the last couple of days, I expect that rain to be on and off too. So we'll have a little wave of some light rain showers, then we'll have a break, then we'll have a little bit more drizzle that is moving in, and that's what's occurring right now. Just a little band of some sprinkles, some light rain, some showers, some drizzle. It's right on top of Dealey Plaza right now. So there you go. Temperatures are at 37 degrees. The sprinkles are around. A little wider look because I want to show you what's moving in your direction in downtown Dallas. We have even more rain. We have rain here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area just to the west, Parker County, Hood County, then down into Somerville and west and north of there. That is all freezing rain and sleet, and even a few flakes of snow are mixing in those locations. So we will keep the rain showers, the very light rain in the forecast here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the next several hours. It's not going to go away. At 1 o'clock, it's noon now, at 1, still in place, and then it's just these little waves that will continue through North Texas as we head through the remainder of the afternoon. For today, the freezing line should stay just to the west of Fort Worth and just west of Denton. West of that line, that's where we'll have the freezing rain and the sleet occurring. Just to the east of that line here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, that's where just light rain showers and drizzle will happen. That's the way it will shape up. Now outside right now at Dealey Plaza at the Dallas County Records Building, WeatherBug's telling us the temperature there is 35. It feels like 33. We have a northwest wind right now, fairly light at this locations, although winds across the area are gusting 15 up to 30 plus miles an hour. So a wind chill right now, not much of a factor, but the air temperature here at our studios at Channel 8, we're at 37. Right now at Dealey Plaza, it's at 35. Love Field's at 37. Fort Worth's at 37, 33 in Denton, and 36 in McKinney. But when you figure in the winds, it feels like 23 in Burleson and 22 in Denton. Wind chills this afternoon in the teens. That's what's in our forecast. Additionally, those areas just to the west of the Dallas-Fort Worth area are under a winter weather advisory until right now through 11 o'clock tomorrow. That's for that sleet and freezing rain that's in the forecast. And then a pretty large system, a potent system that could bring with it accumulating ice for the end of the weekend. That's why we have the winter storm watch in effect Sunday morning through Monday morning. We're going to watch the light rain tonight, throughout the day tomorrow. A little bit of freezing rain and sleet to the west, and then we are looking at some substantial, at least the potential for some ice. I'm talking a lot of sleet and freezing rain. I'll be back in a little bit. We'll have more on that. Temperatures, John and Gloria, right now are at 37. It's just where they've been for the last several hours. You guys have been out there for quite a while. That's why it feels colder. The temperatures are holding steady in the middle to upper 30s.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Yeah, you've been out here a little longer than I have. There's been a lot of people here, as a matter of fact. You know about the people who, of course, are assembled right now in Dealey Plaza. There are a number of individuals who are also demonstrating who would like to be here but are not because, of course, of the controlled access. Our Rebecca Lopez is with those individuals right now. They're nearby. Rebecca, what do you have for us?
I am here at Main and Market, where we are expecting a large group of protesters to arrive any minute now. You can see Dallas police officers down the road prepared. These people gathered about an hour before the ceremony, and they have been gathered over at the Belo Gardens just a couple of blocks away. Our understanding is that they are led by a radio commentator who is wanting to make his way over here. He is upset because he says their freedom of speech is being violated by not being allowed to come into the ceremony. So we have heard that there's a possibility he is going to try to get through the barricades and try to get into the ceremony. Well, obviously, the Dallas police officer is not going to allow that to happen. You cannot get into this service without some ticket or a credential. So that is what's happening here at this moment. You can see DPD officers moving into position. We've also seen a lot of undercover going through the crowd. Patrol officers, a heavy Dallas police presence down here. There are some people that have been upset because they cannot get into the ceremony and think that the general public should be allowed in, but obviously DPD needing to contain this. And here's a gentleman that spoke to us a little while ago about the fact that this area does need to be contained, and he is a little understanding about why he can't get in.
If you saw last night, and it became so apparent, was the mere fact that you had all these people holding up signs, LBJ murderer and everything else. I actually, to be truthful about it, do not blame the city for actually trying to keep this kind of stuff to a minimum. Take a look at the circus that happened.
We can now hear the protesters as they're approaching this area. Again, a large Dallas police presence here. They are gathered over here in the corner. You can see that they have some signs up right now. They are trying to make their way over here. Again, they're saying that they're going to try to make their way through the barricades, and we're watching this very closely with DPD on hand, and more patrol officers are arriving to contain this crowd here. Now for what's happening on the other side of this area here at the West End, we go to our Monica Lopez.
Houston and Elm Streets here in Dallas. As you can see behind me, that's where the event is taking place. Thousands are inside the plaza waiting for the event to begin. For many, the day is about celebrating the life of JFK, his vision, and his legacy. It's also about the pain they have been carrying for the last 50 years.
Just cleanse ourselves, I think. You know, just kind of say, okay, it's over, it's done, let's move on.
I'm hoping that this ceremony gives me some closure, because I didn't realize it until we started coming towards this, that I've carried this for 50 years.
I'm asking myself, what can I do for the community? You know, what can we do for our schools to make this country and this world better?
And back out live here, you can see the people who are on the other side of the barricade. They can't get into the plaza, but they're at least somewhat, they're here despite the weather. They just want to get a glimpse of some of the festivities and the event taking place. Now let's go live to Janet St. James at Parkland, where she has more on the events happening there. Janet.
Monica, Parkland this morning held a very brief and understated ceremony to commemorate its role in history. Staff members, including doctors and nurses, gathered in front of the hospital and bowed their heads for a very brief prayer. And then the flag that flies outside Parkland was lowered to half staff. That flag will eventually be donated to the 6th Floor Museum.
Wanted to remember the men and women who were here that day, who came to work never imagining in a million years that they were going to be caring for a president who was mortally wounded, or a governor who was severely injured, or their families who were so wounded in spirit.
I believe you're looking now at photographs from Trauma Room 1 as it existed in 1963. That trauma room no longer exists, although you can see the entrance of Parkland Emergency Room behind me is as it was back in 1963. None of the people that worked here then work here now, but the mission of Parkland Hospital to serve everyone and to try to save all lives, whether they be presidents or paupers, exists just as strong today as it did 50 years ago. Reporting live from Parkland Memorial Hospital, Janet St. James, Channel 8 News. Now back to Dealey Plaza.
Of course, 50 years ago, President Kennedy began his day in Fort Worth, where he met with the leaders there at a breakfast. And of course, the First Lady was there, and he gave a talk and was very well received in front of over 1,000 people.
That's right. The breakfast, of course, you've probably heard about. So many events that happened there. He arrived at Carswell Air Force Base, which then was on the western edge of Fort Worth, and spent some time there. Then, of course, got on Air Force One and flew over here to Love Field. Now, I understand that the ceremony is about to get underway here, though.
That's right. We've had a little prelude with music from the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and we'll be hearing the Star Spangled Banner, of course, the national anthem, and of course the mayor will speak. There's a historian who will speak, and they will unveil a plaque, and finally it will end with a flyover.
Yeah, as the ceremony begins, let's give you an idea of what we're expecting. You've heard about the mayor is going to be coming in. David McCullough, of course, a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, has arrived. He'll be speaking today. There will also be briefly a moment of silence at 12:30.
This is the Dallas Metro Pipes and Drum Corps, and they're making their entrance here as the colors are presented. $5,000 people expected here, John, today, and we were wondering if indeed 5,000 would show up considering the inclement weather.
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the United States Naval Academy Men's Glee Club under the direction of Dr. Aaron Smith.
We understand that the ceremony is going to be starting very shortly. You've heard about the Naval Academy individuals that have arrived. Here is the picture that most people are seeing from today here at the Dealey Plaza. It gives you a good view of exactly what's going to be going on in the next hour.
When we got here earlier this morning, John, the flags were not at half staff as President Obama has requested on this day of mourning. As we remember, 50 years ago, the 35th President of the United States was assassinated at this very spot.
Yeah. Now they're introducing the individuals who you'll be hearing from today. There's David McCullough. There's the mayor of Dallas, Mayor Rawlings. Again, there's David McCullough right there, and Roseanne Holmes right behind him.
They'll all have a speaking role in this ceremony here today.
We're expecting at exactly 12:30 a moment of silence, and you will hear, if you are downtown or if you're listening, you will be able to hear some of the 40 churches around the area that will be ringing their bells. Of course, that's the exact moment, of course, when the shots rang out and the president was killed. Let's watch some of the ceremony as it gets underway.
And now, we ask you to please rise for the presentation of the colors by the Dallas Police Department Honor Guard.